There is a fracture line running through human experience, subtle, invisible, and yet more decisive than wealth, status, or intellect. It is not the divide between the spiritual and the material, not the divide between the awake and the asleep. It is the great schism between the sovereign and the subject. The subject experiences reality as a weather system. Events happen, moods arrive, opportunities vanish, and life becomes a sequence of reactions, defensive, improvised, and exhausted. The subject asks, "Why is this happening to me?" As if reality were a tribunal, and they were only a defendant waiting for the verdict. But the sovereign inhabits a different architecture. The sovereign does not deny circumstance, yet refuses to be authored by it. They understand a hidden principle, known across esoteric traditions and echoed in depth, psychology and systems theory. Reality is not merely something you enter. It is something that is continuously written, through perception, language, attention, and belief. And the one who controls these instruments controls the world you call real. So the question that begins this episode is not a motivational one. It is a metaphysical one. Are you living inside a reality you inherited? Or inside a reality you are actively designing? In this video, The Architect's Code, Transmuting the Matrix of Reality, we are going to map the invisible boundary between sovereign and subject with surgical clarity. You will learn how the matrix actually operates, not as sci-fi, but as a real psychological and symbolic structure that governs behavior, identity, and fate. Why most people unknowingly consent to their own programming, even while believing they are choosing. The Architect's Code, a practical, esoteric framework for transmutation, how to shift from reaction to authorship, from survival to design, and most importantly, how to reclaim the seat of inner authority so your life stops feeling like something that happens to you and begins to feel like something that moves through you with intention. By the end, you won't just understand the great divide. You'll be able to recognize it in your thoughts, your habits, your relationships, your fears, your synchronicities, and the quiet places where reality is still being negotiated. Because the sovereign is not someone you become by inspiration. The sovereign is someone you become by code. What most people call manifestation has been romanticized into superstition, an aesthetic of vision boards, affirmations, and pleading optimism, a fragile hope dressed up as a method. And because it's framed like a gift, the average person concludes, some people just have it. But the hidden knowledge, quietly preserved in esoteric schools, mirrored in depth psychology, and even hinted at in modern cognitive science, is far less sentimental. Manifestation is not a talent. It is an applied architecture, not a spell but a blueprint, not a mood but a method. If reality is shaped, at least in part, by perception, attention, interpretation, and action, then manifestation becomes the skillful placement of those forces into a coherent design. In other words, you are not begging the universe. You are learning how to build a reality field, a structure strong enough to hold a future that does not yet exist. And this is why the divide between sovereign and subject becomes so stark. The subject manifests by wishing, the sovereign manifests by engineering, while the majority languish in wishful thinking, oscillating. Between hope and disappointment, the elite, across eras, have employed something much colder and more precise. Protocols of mind, what we could call, in modern terms, cognitive algorithms, repeatable internal operations that shape behavior, perception, and outcome. Think of an algorithm as a sequence that reliably produces a result. The elite understand that consciousness is not just a stream of thoughts. It is a selection mechanism. Out of infinite possible interpretations, infinite possible actions, infinite possible timelines, the mind constantly chooses what it will perceive as real and what it will ignore as irrelevant. So the question becomes, who wrote your selection mechanism? Because if the mind is the gatekeeper, then manifestation is the art of rewriting the gate. This is where the phrase collapse infinite probabilities stops being poetic and starts being practical. You live inside a wide field of potential opportunities, encounters, outcomes, pathways, but only a narrow band of that potential becomes your lived experience. Why? Because your attention filters reality, your identity shapes your decisions, your beliefs determine your threshold for possibility, and your nervous system governs what you can tolerate long enough to build. So the elite do not merely think positive. They install internal code that forces reality to reorganize around a new center. They do not ask, what do I want? They ask, what system would produce the life I want as its inevitable output? That is the blueprint. And the blueprint is built through disciplined mechanisms like attention control. What you repeatedly energize becomes your world. Identity enforcement, you will never outperform what you believe you are. Narrative engineering, the story you inhabit becomes the script you act out. Environment design, your surroundings are a silent algorithm shaping your behavior. Repetition with precision, not faith, conditioning. This is why manifestation, in its true esoteric form, is closer to alchemy than magic. Alchemy is not wishing for gold. Alchemy is learning the laws by which base material is refined, through heat, time, and method, until it becomes something else. And here is the uncomfortable truth. The world rewards those who understand systems, and it consumes those who call systems luck. So when the elite appear to effortlessly bend reality, it is rarely effortless. It is simply hidden, behind language, behind institutions, behind rituals of mind that the public was never taught to name. Which brings us to the next doorway. If these cognitive algorithms exist, what are they made of? And more importantly, how do you install the architect's blueprint inside your own consciousness so you stop hoping for a new timeline and start generating it? Now we enter the most misunderstood territory in modern spirituality, the moment where people borrow the language of quantum mechanics to justify fantasy, then wonder why nothing changes. So let's be precise. When I say the quantum mechanics of the divine observer, I'm not claiming you can blink planets into existence. I'm pointing to a deeper, verifiable principle that both mystics and scientists approach from different angles. Reality is not experienced raw. Reality is mediated by observation. In physics, the word observer doesn't mean a human with good vibes. It means measurement, the act that converts possibility into a particular outcome. In psychology, the observer is the witnessing awareness that decides what a stimulus means. In esoteric traditions, the observer is the inner throne, the seat of attention, intention, and interpretation. And in everyday life, this becomes startlingly practical. What you consistently attend to becomes your world. What you emotionally reinforce becomes your pattern. What you repeatedly interpret becomes your destiny. So yes, reality is malleable, but not because the universe is your personal genie. It is malleable because your consciousness is not merely inside reality. Your consciousness is one of the mechanisms by which reality is selected, stabilized, and lived. This is the matrix in its most functional definition. A responsive field of perception, meaning, and behavior. A living interface between the inner world and the outer world. And here is the key. The field responds most strongly not to your words, but to your coherence, the alignment between thought, emotion, identity, and action. That's why frequencies matter, but not in the cartoon version. Frequency here is the signature of what you repeatedly radiate through. Your nervous system, safety versus threat. Your emotional baseline, grief versus gratitude, resentment versus reverence. Your self-concept, small self versus architect self, and your habitual attention. The matrix responds because you respond first, through choices you don't even notice you're making. Most people attempt manifestation with a divided signal. They say abundance but rehearse scarcity. They declare love but embody defense. They visualize freedom but act from fear. And the field, whether you call it psyche, system, or symbolic reality, does what it always does. It amplifies what is consistent, not what is requested. Here's where the plot thickens. These principles are not new. What's new is the packaging. Across history, societies have preserved an uncomfortable understanding that inner authority shapes outer fate, and that if the masses learned the mechanics of inner authority, they would be far harder to govern through fear, envy, and distraction. So the teachings were encoded, hidden in plain sight through allegory and myth, initiation grades, sacred symbols, ritual language, and texts that appear religious on the surface but function as psychological technologies underneath. This is what I mean by history's forbidden pedagogy. The education that does not simply inform, it transforms. The education that, if widely practiced, would produce sovereigns rather than subjects, not because they are evil in a simplistic way, but because power always organizes itself around predictability, and the awakened mind is not predictable. What do esoteric texts repeatedly train? Attention as a sacred instrument, speech as creative law, emotion as fuel, discipline as the altar, identity as the mask that becomes the face, initiation as the rewiring of perception, different languages, same architecture. The conclusion becomes unavoidable. Your life is not only a biography, it is a curriculum. And the matrix is not only a prison, it is also a classroom. Next, the author's stance. So what is the author's stance? It is the moment you stop treating your life as a story you are trapped in, and start treating it as a story you are responsible for composing. not through denial of pain, not through spiritual bypass, not through pretending you're always high frequency, but through something far more mature, the assumption of authorship. The character asks, "Why is this happening?" The author asks, "What is this teaching me about my current operating code?" The character says, "This is who I am." The author says, "This is who I've been conditioned to perform." The character begs reality for change. The author changes the inner pattern that reality keeps reflecting. This is the transition from being written by the world to becoming the one who writes back. Because when you become the author, you begin to see the matrix for what it truly is, a responsive field that mirrors your coherence, rewards your discipline, and amplifies your most repeated identity. And once you see that, you stop chasing signs. You stop bargaining with fate. You stop calling your patterns personality. You begin to do the only thing sovereigns do. You rewrite the code. And in the next segment, we'll move from theory to the first real mechanism of rewriting. How the architect stabilizes a new reality long enough for it to become inevitable. So let's enter visualization as sacred technology. Because active reality is the engineering. Most people visualize the way they watch a movie. Passive, wistful, and secretly doubtful. They treat the inner image as entertainment, then wonder why the outer world remains unchanged. But in the older esoteric framing, visualization is not a fantasy. It is a sacred technology, a disciplined inner act used to engineer the interface between mind and matter. To understand this, we need one essential distinction. A daydream is an image you visit. A thought form is an image you build. A thought form is not merely a picture. It is a structured pattern of attention, emotion, meaning, and expectation, cohered into a single energetic design. In Hermetic language, it is astral substance shaped by will. In modern language, it is a neural emotional blueprint that reorganizes perception and behavior, which then reorganizes outcomes. So the claim is not that your imagination magically rearranges atoms like a wand. The claim is more precise and more dangerous. Your inner imagery programs the filters through which you notice opportunities, interpret events, choose actions, and persist through resistance. And when those filters change, your entire lived reality changes. That is why visualization, practiced correctly, is closer to architecture than to hope. You are not begging life to become different. You are installing a new internal template until your thoughts, emotions, and actions naturally conform to it. This is active reality engineering. You rehearse the state you intend to inhabit. You embody the identity that would naturally create the outcome. You condition the nervous system to treat that outcome as realistic and safe. You stabilize attention until the inner world becomes coherent enough to guide the outer world. Because what manifests is not what you want. What manifests is what you repeatedly inhabit. Now let's speak of the quantum vacuum, but without mythology. In physics, the vacuum is not nothing. It is a field with fluctuations, potential, and latent activity. In spiritual language, it resembles the unmanifest, the fertile emptiness from which form can arise. But your access to that field, psychologically and symbolically, depends on state. Not every brain state treats reality the same way. When you are in fight or flight, your nervous system narrows your world. Threat detection increases, imagination collapses into survival. The future becomes a repetition of past pain. But when you enter slower, more coherent rhythms, states associated with meditation, reverie, deep prayer, and focused absorption, something changes. The mind becomes less fragmented. Attention becomes stable. Imagery becomes vivid. Emotion becomes programmable. And new associations become possible. This is where esoteric practice and neuroscience meet. State governs access. So when we say utilize specific brainwave patterns, the point isn't to chase jargon, it's to understand the principle. To access a wider range of possibilities, you must enter a wider state of consciousness. In the architect's language, you are shifting from the dense, habitual timeline into a creative threshold where new patterns can be encoded. The quantum vacuum, in practical terms, is the inner stillness where old conditioning loses its grip long enough for new code to be installed. And visualization is the instrument that writes into that openness. Here is the final key, perhaps the most important. Yearning is not manifestation. Yearning is a confession of absence. It broadcasts the signal, I do not have it. And the psyche, along with your decisions and your tolerance for discomfort, organizes around that signal. This is why some people manifest for years and only become more exhausted. They are practicing lack with religious devotion. They visualize with desperation. They affirm with fear underneath. They imagine the future while their body remains convinced it is impossible. That is yearning. Yearning is magnetic to disappointment because it continuously reinforces the identity of the one who is waiting. Certainty is different. Certainty is not loud, not performative, not manic. Certainty is a settled inner verdict. It is the moment you stop requesting the outcome and begin operating as if it is already assigned to you, because you have accepted the cost of becoming the person who naturally lives there. Certainty is not I hope. Certainty is I have decided. And here is the nuance that separates fantasy from power. Certainty is not passive belief. Certainty is embodied alignment. It is when your attention stops scattering, emotions stop arguing, identity stops negotiating, actions stop contradicting, and the whole system becomes coherent. That coherence is what ancient traditions called will, not egoic force, softer, deeper, the unified direction of the being. And when you reach that state, you stop trying to manifest. You start behaving as an architect, because the universe, if you want the mystical phrasing, does not respond to begging. It responds to command. Not command as arrogance, command as alignment with law. The operating system of reality is coherence, and certainty is coherence crystallized. So the protocol becomes simple, but not easy. Enter the receptive state, stillness, coherence, threshold. Build the thought form with precision, not vague imagery, lived reality. Seal it with embodied certainty, identity plus emotion plus action aligned. Repeat until the inner template becomes your default self. And once it becomes your default self, the outer world doesn't miraculously change. It simply begins to mirror what you have stabilized within. Which brings us to the next segment, the question that terrifies the subject and liberates the sovereign. If visualization is sacred technology, what are the exact steps the architect uses to install a new reality without relapse, without doubt, without returning to the old code? If the architect's blueprint is real, then it must be reproducible, not dependent on mood, not dependent on astrology, not dependent on charisma. A true technology can be taught, tested, repeated, and refined. So here is the core mechanism. A cognitive algorithm, a three-phase sequence that converts spiritual insight into operational reality. And notice the framing. We are not trying to attract a life. We are trying to replace the code that keeps generating the current one. Because what you call my reality is often just your subconscious running yesterday's program with today's calendar. Phase 1, pattern interruption. The deliberate halting of automatic, limiting subconscious cycles. Before you build the new, you must stop feeding the old. Most people attempt manifestation while their subconscious is still performing the same loops, the same internal dialogue, the same emotional triggers, the same defensive identity, the same predictions disguised as realism. They visualize abundance and then, 10 minutes later, rehearse catastrophe. They affirm love and then, at the first discomfort, return to armor. So the first move is not think positive. The first move is interrupt the trance. Pattern interruption is the moment you catch the program in motion and refuse to let it complete its cycle. This is the sovereign act. And it usually looks like 3 micro moves. Recognition. You name the pattern without fusing with it. This is the scarcity loop. This is the abandonment script. This is the self-sabotage ritual. You break the automatic chain, physiologically and cognitively. Change posture, change breath, change environment, change input. Because the subconscious is not only language, it is body memory. Refusal of completion. This is crucial. You do not let the old narrative reach its conclusion. You stop at mid-sentence, mid-prediction, mid-doom. The old program feeds on momentum. It wins by finishing the loop. Pattern interruption is the moment you say, this cycle ends here. And in esoteric terms, this is the first act of alchemy, separation. You separate the witness from the pattern. You remove consciousness from the spell. Phase 2, replacement programming. Installing new thought structures through the fusion of emotion and certainty. Interrupting the old code is not enough. A vacuum is not neutral. If you stop a program and install nothing, the mind will reload the default. The nervous system will return to the known. Because the known feels safe even when it is painful. So phase 2 is the installation. And the installation has a secret ingredient most people ignore. Emotion is the ink. Certainty is the seal. A new thought without emotion is a dead sentence. A new image without certainty is a temporary hallucination. Replacement programming requires fusion, a coherent imprint that the subconscious recognizes as real. This is where visualization becomes sacred technology again. But now with precision, you don't just picture the outcome. You install the identity that naturally produces it. You generate the feeling state that would exist if it were already true, and you anchor it with a decision so complete it stops negotiating, because the subconscious does not obey what you wish. It obeys what you repeatedly present as certain. So your replacement script is not, I hope I can It is, this is who I am now. This is what I do now. This is what I allow now. And to make it operational, you attach it to a behavioral trigger. Example, when anxiety rises, you run the new protocol. When doubt speaks, you answer with the installed code. When an old pattern invites you back, you refuse and perform the new identity once. That once is not small. One enacted identity is worth more than 1,000 affirmations. Phase 3, integration and automation. The final stage where manifestation becomes automatic, requiring minimal conscious effort. This is the stage most people never reach, because they confuse inspiration with installation. But the architect isn't chasing a mood. The architect is building an automatic system. Integration means the new code stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like me. It becomes default. It becomes reflex. It becomes the background operating system. This is what traditions meant by initiation. Not information, transformation. In this stage, you no longer try to think differently. You simply do. You no longer force discipline. It becomes natural. You no longer manifest as an event, manifestation. Becomes a byproduct of who you are, because the subconscious has accepted the new identity as home. And here's the metric of true automation. When pressure hits, you don't revert. Most people are high frequency until life squeezes them. Then the old program returns and reveals itself as the real ruler. Automation is when life squeezes you and the new code holds. At that point, manifestation requires minimal, conscious effort, not because you're lazy, but because the system is aligned. Your attention, emotion, identity, and action are no longer in civil war. They are unified, and unified systems generate unified realities. So the 3-phase sequence is not motivational, it's mechanical. Interrupt the old loop, remove power from the trance. Install coherent replacement code, emotion, certainty, and identity. Repeat until automated, until it is default under pressure. And once it's automated, you stop asking, how do I manifest? Because your life answers for you. You become the kind of being for whom the desired reality is not a miracle, it is an inevitability. If the architect's code has a command center, it is not midday willpower. It is not the noisy intellect trying to overpower decades of conditioning. It is the subconscious, the silent engine beneath. The surface that decides what feels possible, what feels safe, what feels real, and therefore what you will consistently enact. Here is the uncomfortable arithmetic of the human condition. Your conscious mind is a spotlight, narrow, linear, and easily fatigued. Your subconscious is an ocean, vast, parallel, and perpetually active. You can think of it as a power differential. Popular cognitive estimates often describe the subconscious as processing orders of magnitude, more input than conscious awareness, millions of signals versus mere dozens at a time. Whether one accepts exact numbers or not, the conclusion remains the same. The conscious mind chooses, the subconscious mind permits, and what the subconscious does not permit will not stabilize, no matter how poetic your affirmations are. This is why the elite never rely on motivation alone. They target the deeper layer, the part of you that runs the program when you're tired, triggered, or tempted. So the question becomes, how do you access it? And the best practice is through the hypnagogic interface, the 8-minute gate, between wakefulness and sleep. There is a threshold state, hypnagogia, where the mind begins to loosen its strict grip on identity and certainty. The analytical gatekeeper softens. The inner sensor becomes drowsy. Images become vivid. Suggestibility increases. In the architect's language, this is an interface layer. The filtering mechanisms of established belief are temporarily offline. That makes this window extraordinarily valuable. Not because it is magic, but because it is efficient. When you are fully awake, the old code argues with you. That's unrealistic. Who do you think you are? It never works. Be reasonable. But in the hypnagogic interface, you can plant a new structure before the old tribunal assembles. So here is the ritual, 8 minutes, deliberately brief, because the subconscious responds to clarity, not chatter. The 8-minute nocturnal ritual, the architect's method. Minute 1, silence the surface. Lie down, no phone. No input, dim the room. Take 6 slow breaths. Long exhale emphasis. This tells the nervous system, we are safe. We can rewrite. You are not trying to relax. You are reducing resistance. Minutes 2-3, pattern severance. Name the old loop you refuse to run tonight. 1 sentence only. I release the scarcity trance. I end the self-doubt script. I dissolve the conflict pattern. Then visualize it as a simple symbol. Thread, chain, loop, or mask, and cut it. This matters because the subconscious speaks in images. You are not negotiating with the pattern. You are terminating it, Minutes 4 to 6, replacement imprint, emotion with certainty. Now install the new code in 3 layers. 1. Identity, who I am now. 2. Reality, what is now true. 3. Permission, what I allow. As you say each line, generate the feeling that would exist if it were already established. Not excitement, but settledness. The vibe is not, I can't wait. The vibe is, of course. That is certainty, quiet, finished, non-argumentative. Then run a micro-visualization, 10 to 15 seconds of one ordinary moment in that reality, not fireworks. Something simple. Checking your bank app calmly, waking up without dread, receiving an email that confirms the outcome, walking with that posture, that breath, that inner silence. The subconscious believes the ordinary. Minutes 7 to 8, the seal, the final command. End with a single command phrase, short, declarative. It is done. This is my reality now. So it is established. Then stop. Do not keep trying. Do not overthink. Sleep is the delivery mechanism. Now we arrive at the true esoteric insight. Sleep is not downtime. Sleep is the laboratory. When you sleep, the rigid architecture of linear time and rigid identity softens. The psyche processes symbols, integrates memory, reorganizes emotional meaning, and rehearses possible futures. Even modern neuroscience agrees on a basic point. Sleep consolidates learning and reshapes what the brain treats as important. In mystical language, you are entering the unmanifest workshop where reality is still fluid, enough to be impressed upon. So the architect leverages sleep for 3 reasons. Time-space loosens psychologically. The future becomes more accessible as a lived inner experience. The subconscious rehearses what you imprint. Repetition occurs without effort. Your inner world keeps running the program. Your perception recalibrates by morning. You wake up noticing different doors, tolerating different risks, selecting different actions, often without realizing the code has shifted. And that is the secret. Manifestation accelerates not because atoms obey your desire, but because you begin to obey a new internal reality, automatically. If you do this ritual with yearning, you reinforce lack. If you do this ritual with certainty, you install authorship. The subject falls asleep pleading, the sovereign falls asleep programming. And over time, the night becomes your silent ally, your private initiation, where the old world dissolves, and the new world is rehearsed until it becomes inevitable. So let us gather the entire teaching into one clear spine. There is a great divide moving silently through humanity. The difference between those who merely endure reality and those who author it. The subject lives as if life is a verdict. The sovereign lives as if life is a design. And what separates them is not luck, not privilege, not talent, but code. Because manifestation, in its true esoteric meaning, is not a wish whispered into the dark. It is the disciplined application of an architect's blueprint, a method of aligning attention, emotion, identity, and action so coherently that reality must reorganize around the new center. You learn that the matrix is malleable, not because the world is fantasy, but because your consciousness is a selection mechanism. It filters possibility into experience. What you repeatedly energize becomes your world. What you consistently embody becomes your timeline. You saw visualization as sacred, technology, an active engineering of thought forms, where emotion becomes the ink, and certainty becomes the seal. Not yearning, not desperate hoping, but the quiet inner verdict that says, it is established. Then we made it operational through the cognitive algorithm. Interrupt the old pattern before it completes its loop. Install new programming through emotion fused with certainty. Integrate until automated, until pressure no longer triggers relapse. And finally, you were given the command center. The 8-minute nocturnal ritual using the hypnagogic threshold as an interface to bypass the gatekeeper of old belief, allowing sleep itself to become the alchemical lab, where your new reality is rehearsed into inevitability. So here is the core message stated plainly. You are not here to beg reality. You are here to code it, not through force, through coherence, not through fantasy, through disciplined inner alignment, not through escaping the world, through becoming its author. And if you remember nothing else, remember this. Reality does not change when you want it. Reality changes when you become consistent. When your inner world stops arguing with itself, the outer world stops resisting you. Now, if you're ready to step out of the subject's trance and into the sovereign's seat, do this tonight. Run the 8-minute nocturnal ritual exactly as taught. No improvising, no overthinking, just precision. Then come back and comment one word. Coded. If you want, add what you're rewriting. Scarcity, fear, self-doubt, procrastination, old identity. so we anchor it together as a community of architects. And if this message spoke to you, subscribe, because the next videos will go deeper into the actual diagnostics: how to detect hidden resistance, dissolve emotional contracts with limitation, and stabilize the new timeline until it becomes your normal. Until then, remember, you are not a character trapped in the story. You are the sovereign author of the narrative. Until next time, Universal Consciousness signing out.